That's interesting question, Roland. Maybe we can get closer to an answer to that. But the answer to the question, as you asked it, is unanswerable. There are no five most successful businesses for expats. If there were, that would be a really, really bad situation because all the big boys would do all the businesses, right? Elon Musk would have all five of them, and so would Bill Gates, and so would Bezos, and all of those guys, right? So doesn't really work that way. The closest thing to an answer to that question is going to be the best business for you to start is the thing you know best, right? An example of that is we had a guy who used to work for Dunkin' Donuts. He made over $1 million selling coffee beans direct from coffee farmers here in Kenya back to boutique coffee shops in America. So like little donut shops and bagel shops that roasted coffee every single morning. That's how he made his money. But it's because he knew coffee. He knew what coffee snobs like. He knew what people who were the absolute opposite of a coffee snob was. The people who walk into Dunkin' Donuts are like, I just want regular coffee. I don't want these flavors. Like he dealt with that for almost 20 years. So he knew both sides of that coin. And so for him, that was the best business, right? But typically people who like list off these are, the five best businesses. Normally they're involved in numbers 1, 2, and 3, if not all five, right? And then you go to them and you pay them to get involved in the business. And that's why they're calling it the best, right? But objectively speaking, it's going to be whatever you know best, right? So even if what you're doing is a job and you're working a job, it's going to be you taking that job you work and converting that job into a business, right? So that's the closest thing to an answer to that question that I can give you. All right. I hear you guys on YouTube. I don't know what the glare is either. That's the only camera that has a glare. I apologize for that. Maybe we'll have that camera serviced. Okay, so Facebook is saying, are there professional jobs? So all jobs are available, right? But in order to work a job, you need a work permit. In order to get a work permit, an existing company in Kenya would have to hire you, and they have to pay a lot of money to do that hiring, right? So in order to get a work permit, you would need to be hired, and then that company would essentially sponsor you, and then you would end up working under that work permit. So like every job is technically available, but why hire you instead of a local is going to be the question that both the government and the company asks, because it's way cheaper to hire a local than it is to import talent. And typically locals work for less money than imported talent does. So both of those situations are things that you're going to have to overcome. So if you're a specialist, like if you're a brain surgeon or something, then that's the answer to the question, right? That's why to hire you, because you're a specialist, brain surgeon that maybe not many of the brain surgeons here specialize in, something like that. All right, got rolling again. So my background is in fire and EMS. I'd like to start an ambulance service focused on expats. Used 1 of 2. Okay, I'll wait for number 2. Used to Western medicine, pre-hospital care. So, I mean, folks here are used to that. Now, I suppose folks who maybe like, can't afford, private hospitals and all that, maybe they're not. But Kenya is the only country in East Africa where medical knowledge is transferable directly to America, right? So if you're a registered nurse, let's say in Uganda, you cannot simply take what's called an NCLEX exam. If you're into EMS, you know what that is. You can't just take an NCLEX and then submit your test scores to the State Board of Nursing and then get a nursing license in, I don't know, Maryland, right? New Jersey, Pennsylvania, wherever. If you're a Kenyan RN, you can. So if you're a Kenyan equivalent of a registered nurse, they don't call it RN here, but if you're the equivalent of a registered nurse in Kenya, you can literally go take your NCLEX, submit your scores to the Pennsylvania Board of Nursing or the New Jersey Board of Nursing, and get a nursing license, and then get a specialist visa and come to America and do nursing, right? So in Kenya, if your business model hinges on people not being familiar with like American style medicine, then it's going to fall apart in Kenya because they are familiar with that level of medicine. So it would be quite normal to them. Now, if you're looking to bring full ambulatory services, that could work. But I guess you would have to figure out like which section of which city you're going to start in, unless you have the capital or unless you have the venture capital behind you to actually institute like a regional test market and then go from there. So I guess it depends on how much capital you're bringing to the organization. But if you're just starting like with one ambulance, then you're going to have that ambulance, number one, connected to a hospital somewhere, and there's going to have to be a way for people to contact that ambulance, right? Some kind of 911 or logistical number, to get to that ambulance that you have in the field. And now if you're talking about full on ambulatory services, like, they're, giving narcotics, like paramedic level ambulatory services, then there might be something there, right? Not all ambulances, a lot of ambulances have more of an EMT level of service available versus a paramedic level of service available. So if you're looking to do that, there's something, but it's just going to be a whole lot of feasibility study done, because you're going to want to make sure that wherever you are, there's enough hospitals around to service the business idea, number one. And then number two, you're going to have to almost redesign the ambulance unit that you're using, depending on what the road, the road level is, right? So potholes are epidemic in a lot of places, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, right? So you don't want to be providing full on ambulatory services to the point where you can crack a chest open, right? And you're massaging like, a heart, and then you're hitting potholes, every other minute, unless you have an engineer in there that's designing shocks for you, that even when you're hitting the potholes and the bumps and all that, the ambulance isn't moving, right? So you want to make sure that you have those things in place. Does that make sense? Awesome. But people will get it, because that's one good thing about having the same level of medicine, is that people will understand what you're doing. If you went to a place that had a drastically different level of medicine, then they wouldn't even get it. They would just laugh and not realize that it was helpful. We ran into that. What country were we in where we ran into that? We ran into that in Botswana, I think it was. We were doing due diligence there for like a landscaping service. And people, they essentially have like a machete where the tip of the machete is bent like this. And they swing it, and it's like a scythe, it's like a little mini scythe. So you got 20 guys with these bent machetes cutting the grass, right? It takes them 8-9 hours to do it. And so a client of ours wanted the feasibility study of like what it would look like to bring actual landscaping services in there, and weed whackers and that type of stuff. And so like the people just laughed it off, like they didn't understand it at all, because this is not something that existed there at the time. Maybe things have changed. That was a decade ago, but at the time they were just like, whatever, we'll get 20 people and let it take 9 hours to mow the lawn versus one guy with a weed whacker, or a guy on a riding mower, right? It just didn't make sense to them. So sometimes, regardless of how logical it might be to you, it might not make sense in that particular territory. That's one of the good things about Kenya. That's why we focus on Kenya, is because Kenya is just on par with everything that's essentially normal to us. And so it's really, really easy to hit the ground running. There's no language barrier for Americans or Canadians or Brits. If you're French, maybe, or from Spain, maybe. But if you speak English, there's no language barrier there. There's no education barrier. They have a similar to superior level of education that we're used to. So that's not a barrier either. And so it's really, really easy to just hit the ground running. in Kenya versus like some of the West African countries where we went and we did due diligence in those countries. And you have to learn a completely new culture, even though they're speaking English. It might be like a pidgin English that you can't understand at all. The laws are absurdly different. So like sometimes it's really difficult to understand how the laws work. And, and then so the people who realize that you don't know how the laws work might ask you for a bribe instead of telling you how the laws work. And that's where you get these negative kind of stereotypes about Africa, right? That is not the case in Kenya, right? You can go anywhere outside of the United States and essentially try to bribe an official process. So the bribe thing is universal. Even in the United States, it happens, except in the United States, we only do it when you're really, really rich, and we call it a super PAC. But the bribe thing is kind of universal par for the course. The issue becomes if there's a way to do it, in your stand-up countries, you'll be told how to do it. Right. So the only people who are trying to do the bribery thing are people who are not ethical people in the first place. Right. I remember when we hit the ground in Nigeria, we ended up going to a place called Lekki. We got stopped by police on the way and we were expecting them to be like, oh, you were speeding or you were whatever. And we're sitting in the back because we're not driving. Right. And literally the window went down. They looked in the back, they said something in whatever language it was. And then the other one was, and the other cop, was at the back window, was just like, give me money. Like literally just, no shame at all. Nothing had happened. They just knew that it was, I think we were in like a navigator, like a stretch navigator. So they knew somebody was in that car and it didn't have government plates. So it wasn't, the governor of Abuja or whatever, And so they pulled us over and there was like, oh, there's foreigners in there. We're going to get money. That doesn't happen in Kenya. You know what I mean? So we don't see the same level of, I don't know if you want to call it corruption or whatever, but we don't see the same level of it in Kenya as we do in some other countries, right? So that was one of the biggest reasons why we chose Kenya as well, is that we don't run into that type of stuff. Now, in order to do business directly, the one thing that they do is they don't play games with like talkers, I guess, if you want to call it that, right? That's the way that it best connects with our experiences, is like people who talk a good game. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this, and then never actually do anything, right? So the law is set up that if you want to come and open a business here, you got to prove it. You got to put up or shut up, right? Hey, no problem, Roland. And so if you're going to do business directly with Kenyans and have offices in Kenya, you need an investor permit. The investor permit is a legal process. We have a law firm that takes, our clients through that process and gets them the permit. But the toughest part of the permit for most people is that they have to put $100,000 in a local bank account. They don't pay it to anybody. They don't lose their $100,000. It's not the cost of the permit. It's just to prove that you actually are a business person and that you're not going to open up a business and it closes down in 2 months. Because the issue is very similar to the United States. They have like Social Security. They have like, not necessarily unemployment, but they have like Medicaid, if you will, right? NHIF it's called. And so there are these things that you pay for your employees, same as, the stuff that you pay for employees in the United States. YouTube, you guys, your stream is acting up. I'm going to end your stream. Just go to either Facebook or TikTok. All right. So